Kurt, man, it's good to have you on the show. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad that the calendaring finally worked out. And so it's great to see you.
And
And
likewise.
I know, and I think, and for everyone listening today, Kurt and I, we know each other. He runs the Cagle Report, which is blowing up on LinkedIn. And I reached out to him. I said, we should really get together and have you talk about the report. So I think it's always a good first one to jump in and say, how'd you come up with the crazy idea? So let's go to you.
Okay. I've been working in the data space now for, roughly 30, 35 years. And when I got started, I basically got started doing kind of a mix of working with really, doing the programming thing and trying to stay afloat as a programmer, and worked for a while at Microsoft.
And could you sort of speak up just a little bit, right? So I don't.
Right. Right. Is that any better?
Perfect, my man.
Okay, just looking for Mike. But about the same time that I started working, I really actually started working in the game arena. For a while, I did work for the company that did Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, among a number of others. At the time, I'd actually kind of been getting into a specific area for trying to talk about, trying to help developers, become better developers by writing articles for various places. Over a period of time, that turned into books. So I've actually written 23 books currently, of which most of them are focused on web technologies, semantics, XML, things along those lines. And I also spent more and more time kind of on the journalism side of things. Podcasting is a new one for me. It's only been really within the last year or so that I've even thought about going into that direction. But
one of the things why I want you on here is, you're right. I mean, podcasts, it's just another way, and then like you're doing on video, it's just another way to get the message out. And you've written these books. So I want to kind of throw a question at you, about that is, in the books that you've written and the stuff you write, what do you think qualifies a person as a data scientist in your eyes? I mean, that's a big word. I'm a data scientist. What is in your eyes? How do you get to be that?
That's a hard question, right? And I think that, first of all, I think that the term here has to be kind of qualified. When you're talking about data science, what you're basically talking about is actually a whole range of potential areas: statistics, stochastics, deep learning, semantics. Really, there's a lot of different areas that kind of qualify under that particular rubric. And because of that, it's something that you get a lot of people that basically go off and say, yeah, I'm going to take a class in statistics or the like and learn how to work with Python, and that makes me a data scientist. My own personal feeling is that a data scientist should actually be a scientist first. And I'm sure that's probably a very controversial idea, but the idea really kind of comes down to this notion that when you talk about a data scientist, you're talking about a subject matter expert. You're talking about someone who basically understands the domain that they're talking about, that then can utilize the tools of analytics and machine learning and the like in order to be able to better facilitate the creation of models and interpret those models to be able to drive both decisions and potentially code.
Okay, so I just want to dig into that one, right? So that's a bit like, I'm tracking what you're saying about the data scientist. Now, where then do they fit in the organization? Like, based on your definition, right? I'm tracking it to where do then they fit?
It depends upon the organization. if you look at the use of data scientists in business is very new. When you think about it, most of this basically has evolved from the business analyst. A lot of people basically started out, thinking of this primarily as okay, we need to be able to identify the languages and terminologies, the other, the aspects of basically what kind of information you're trying to get within a business, and how to be able to effectively use that for the overall process of analytics. Now, that notion is relatively new. Up until fairly recently, it's a notion that I think a lot of people really kind of worked in the area of say, BI, business intelligence, doing very much the same thing with many of the same tools. What's become different is that you've basically seen this uptick in people that are saying, okay, you now have to come in as a statistician. You now have to come in basically as someone who's a specialist in the area of working with code. And I think that's a very dangerous assumption to make. For a business, the business requirements that you have really kind of come down to the need of being able to identify what the outside world is saying to you, what the internal state of the organization is, and how those basically all come to make up a decision. Essentially, if you aren't doing that particular task in some fashion, and I've written about this before, then you're basically wasting time. Now, there are data scientists that are going to be involved in production and building out of models that are specifically designed for doing certain specific activities. Anything from recommendation engines to things like Microsoft Office and its various and sundry data tools.
And I think you say you wrote about it. That's something like how we connected was reading the report, and I think when you think about the report, you said you wrote something about that. How do you think about publishing it? Are you trying to? You find a topic and then or a story, then you write about it. You're writing about a business case. Like walk the audience through, like maybe an example or an idea that you think about, then you publish it. Why don't you tell us about that process?
So typically I write, I publish the report twice a week if I can. I originally said, let's try it once a day, and I decided that I was insane.
That's great. That's once a day. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't get anything else done. It was that simple. Typically what will happen is that I'll spend, maybe an hour in the morning, working through what seem to be dominant topics, what things are of interest. A lot of times I'll basically just do research. And as I'm working with it, one of the things that I try to do in my own stuff is specifically looking for analysis and, looking to write up analysis. So sometimes it's specifically teaching certain kinds of things. Sometimes it's basically doing analysis, looking at where the industry is. Sometimes it's basically, I was looking at an article about the creation of the moon, and I thought, that'd be a really cool thing to write about. And that's sometimes the thing that drives it. But usually I try to look specifically at how data is used in an organization and how data is used when dealing with people who work within those organizations. And so a lot of the work that I do really does tend to talk about enterprise data management around semantics and similar areas.
And of the stuff that you've written, we talk about COVID. We could talk about COVID as the R0. We can talk about COVID as everyone working from home. What concerns me is we have a great data science community that might be more of an introvert than an extrovert. So, and they might like working from home, right? It's comfortable. Put the headphones on. Crank.
Right. Well, yeah, I like working from home. I've got the headphones on. I think that I'm going to actually kind of parse that out a little bit.
Please do.
I actually during excuse me, during the first few really the first 6 to 8 weeks after the after March, when the number of cases began to rise, I spent a lot of time on various webinars. I talked with a number of people both here in the US and in Europe, specifically about data standards and the challenges that you had with things like the GDPR, specifically in terms of how do you balance out the need for privacy versus the need for research materials? How do you basically get, how do you talk about things like contact tracing, which ultimately is a fairly deep invasion of privacy because it requires that you're essentially tracking the movement of people over time. And oftentimes, because you're trying to automate the process, it's something that you're getting a lot of information that could potentially not be, used wisely if that same information came out. So there's a lot of concerns that you have when dealing with the epidemic in general that have really been raised as a part of that. I also think that because of the nature of the lockdown, one of the things that we did was to essentially pull forward kind of a natural evolution of work patterns, of issues, of problems that basically come about from a digitally transformed world. About 5 years. And so, a lot of these issues we would have still encountered 5 years from now, but because we needed it now, it basically forced us to accelerate things very, very quickly. And one of the consequences we're looking at now is really just how do we, having made those jumps, now we're having to deal with the consequences of it.
It's funny you say that, because let's take recruiting just as an example.
Sure.
Video interviewing, not new. People have been talking about that for a long time. So I think Google was the first company just to say we're all going to work remote, and the cascading effect was video interviewing.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's okay. And then everyone is doing video interviewing, but again, not a new concept of video interview. And now I think what's nice is, people don't have to get on the plane or a plane to spend a full day that maybe interviewing, and meeting multiple people. I think, I'm not saying it's an ideal situation, but I think it shows that it's okay. It's okay to do.
When I, several years ago, I interviewed over at Adobe down in San Jose. And when I did, I got on the plane and really realized as I got on the plane that I probably shouldn't have been traveling. I was flying around with I was basically there with about 103 temperature, and was pretty much completely out of it. And I got down to the campus of Adobe, and we started the interview, and it was kind of like my brain was not even mush. And not surprisingly, I didn't get the job. But I think that one of the things that really told me was, okay, it took, effectively about $1,000 to get me onto that plane so that I could sit in front of a whiteboard and go, I don't have any idea what's going on because my brain is hurting. And, that kind of factor was oftentimes something that facilitated a fair amount of waste, but it also meant that everyone was dealing with these same issues. Now, I don't necessarily think that it was altogether that feasible before. We talk about what's happening with things like Zoom and other companies in that regard. But I have been doing this myself, and I've been using video technologies myself for better part of 15 years. And 10 years ago, we would have been in serious trouble if we had to do what we did now, because we didn't have the infrastructure to support it. We didn't have the technology to support it. The speed of things were way too slow to be able to facilitate it. Today, we were just lucky enough, if you want to look at it that way, that, yeah, we could support the infrastructure, and that still required a fairly massive amount of planning on the part of the people that were maintaining those systems. So I think
that's it's something no one's really, I think, took a time to reflect on. Is there is a little bit of luck, right? We have good coverage of cell towers, or good enough coverage in most places. We've got good enough home speed internet connections.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great that your company might have the tools, but yeah, there's some outliers of, in rural areas, but yeah, you're right. You can log in your house, and for the most part, not get frozen the entire Zoom meeting. Yeah, there will be blocks, but it's not the entire meeting. It's a good point.
Well, and to kind of take this a little further, one of the things that I think is going to happen now, and it gets back into the whole issue of data and the like, we've just proven that a lot of the infrastructure investment, especially with putting data technology in a localized place that is not where your people are, is actually a bad thing, because it's meant that, okay, now you are responsible for maintaining that system, even when you don't necessarily have the people to be able to support it. And I think that as a consequence of that, several things have happened. First of all, we've become much more reliant upon the use of Git and other tools to be able to store our information. We've become much more reliant upon cloud-based services and cloud-based data services in particular for being able to actually store the data content that we're dealing with. And we're getting to the point where we're also becoming much more adept at data transformations and moving from one system to another. And all of that is increasingly putting the question about whether or not a company gets any value in maintaining their technical infrastructure locally to the test. And in a lot of cases, it's failing. It's just not working. We're discovering that, as much as we might like to believe otherwise, it's not necessarily any more secure having your data in a physical place. And once you start going down that rabbit hole, then the next question becomes, okay, well, if you don't have your data there, or your data is universally available, then in a data-driven organization, what's the real purpose in having people work in an work in an office, work in a physical structure? And so, I actually follow this a great deal. I think that they're very, very closely related. But I also think that with COVID and with this long drawn out process, and it's going to be a process that'll take a year or more to finally work through, we're going to see a radical rethink. We already are, about how we manage our business infrastructure. And, I think that to a certain extent, I don't think we're going to go back to a 100% remote option. I think people do need to occasionally meet, but the goal or the purpose of the way that organizations are set up now, I see a lot of work from home even after COVID becomes a distant memory.
So who wins, right? So let's play this out. You know, we give you the magic wand. It's 3 to 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Is Amazon and Microsoft the big winners, or is it going to be um, Oracle or Facebook, or is it everyone, or is it Slack? Is it just everyone's winning? I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to figure out who's going to win.
Yeah. Well, I'm first of all, I'm not going to I'm not going to necessarily handicap any company out there, because I think that in a lot of respects, trying to figure out who is going to win is a lot like saying, okay, I don't know the names of the horses or anything about them. I just happen to know that I've got a list of names that I'm working with, and that's how I'm going to be able to vote or to bet. But I do think that realistically, if your company is enabling the ability to work dynamically, if your company is basically moving to a point where geocentrism is no longer the dominant principle for hiring, for collaboration, for working with clients and so forth, that in many respects, the winners are going to be the ones that best facilitate that.
I
Amazon.
want to go
So
back
go
there.
on.
I love what you just said. Geofencing is, just go back there and give me the example. I think that's a gem. Go back to that thought bubble.
Sure. Well, what I actually said was geocentrism, but I think geofencing is actually a good term too. The idea basically is that up until very recently, we have always had, there's been no question that a corporation, that a company basically was very much tied into where its business entities are. And that's still true to a certain extent. But I personally am working with projects with people in Singapore, in India, in Europe, in Africa, in London, in Germany. This is the nature. This is basically the reality that we're facing right now. Is that like it or not, we are basically moving into a global operation, into a global modality. And a lot of the infrastructure that we have, everything from the buildings to the organizational structure, really tends to revolve around where you are in space. And increasingly it's an irrelevant consideration. About the only real constraint is, okay, can you manage to schedule something where one person is in London and one person is in Singapore and one person is me in Seattle, and not have someone basically operating in the middle of the morning, or like 3 a.m. in the morning. But beyond that, I think that what's happening now is that we're kind of moving to this notion that business is essentially no longer fixed in terms of its locality. You can work from anywhere, you can develop from anywhere. And the companies that don't realize that, they're the ones that are going to be left behind.
Yeah, no, I love it. And listen, I think that's a great place to stop. I mean, that's, I'm so happy we finally got to do this and get together. So tell the audience how we can get you, find you, search for you, and read your stuff. What's the URL? And of course I'll post it, but how do we get to the report?
I'm currently just going through LinkedIn. So and I don't unfortunately have a clean URL for that. But
so what I'll do is I'm going to add the link to your LinkedIn profile to the feed.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and everyone look at it. And again, always appreciate you coming on the show. Always invited back as you get more content, more things to share. I think I want to keep digging into this work from anywhere. I think there's something there. We appreciate you coming. And for all our listeners, you can always check us out at thedatastandard.io. And Kurt Cagle, we love you for coming on. Stay healthy. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thank you very much, Darren.